So a warm welcome to all our grandparents on this cheerful morning. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Anuradha Sovani, psychologist, psychotherapist. She's a former professor and head Department of Psychology and former Dean, Faculty of Humanities, SNDT, Women's University. Dr. Sovani has been a member of the Academic Council, Management Council, and Senate of the University, and has formerly headed the Department of Applied Psychology, University of Mumbai. This session is a part of Grandparenting and Child Care in India. We thank them for this platform today. Grandparents, this talk is specially planned for you. You play a very important role in children's lives. Every child is blessed with mentors, role models in you, and at the same time, you're their friends and companions whom the children can bond with so beautifully. You have Today, Dr. Anuradha Sovani will point the way to a healthy you, that is our grandparents, and enjoyable grandparenting. Over to you, Dr. Sovani. We welcome you warmly today.
Thank you so much, Sharmila ma'am. It's my pleasure to be with all of you. I'm a grandparent myself, so I cannot think of anything more apt than one grandparent chatting with so many. And I'm so happy that all of you are here in large numbers. On a lighter note, I will say with as much, if not more enthusiasm than the little ones that Mrs. Lele deals with in the school. I love that age group. I think it's an amazing and magical age group. I'm really going to enjoy this whole interaction with all of you. I'm going to keep it very light-hearted because I don't want serious slides. Okay, this is a fresh, nice morning, and there is a lot to discuss. So I think I'm going to keep the slides very light, but the matter that we are going to share is actually quite serious because, like Mrs. Lele pointed out, we are a very important factor in the upbringing of the little ones. And I know it's a delight to all of you also, because you want to be a part of the life of the little one. You want to see the school, you want to see the teachers, the various faculties that interact with your children. I'm going to request all of you to keep your mics mute, and also please raise, if your hand is raised, just lower it, because then I won't know if you have a question later, if your hand remains raised. But feel absolutely free to put questions in the chat. So that, while I'm speaking also, I can try and address some of the questions. And of course, we will keep a lot of time in the end for interaction because there's a large number of you and I'm sure there are many issues. So when I finish saying what I want to say, I'll hand the ropes back to Sharmila Lele ma'am, and then we'll take it forward from there. So welcome, and let's have a nice interaction. Anjum, can we start the slides, please? So we've aptly called AACCI, in fact, the organization has very aptly called this entire program the Grandeur of Grandparenting. And I think I actually learned that when I myself became a grandparent. I was very fortunate to have wonderful grandparents myself. So I really understood the kind of bond that there can be between a grandparent and a grandchild. And then the word grandeur really became more appropriate, even today, when I look back with great respect, because even in lighter moments, when my grandparents and I shared something when I was a child, today, the import of that teaching, that learning comes back to me at this age. So I think it's a very important role that very gently we are teaching these little ones a lot of values. At the same time, we are seeing to it that their parents and they are very close with each other. So we don't want to interfere with the bond between the mother and the child and the father and the child as much as we love the child. So it's a balancing act. Everyone says grandparenting is easy, you can just spoil the child, but that's not true at all. Because if you want to have healthy adults later on, you have to let the child understand that there are boundaries, and the boundaries are often the ones laid down by the parents. But at the same time, one can have a wonderful relationship. Let's just begin with the first slide. What we're talking about here is who are these grandparents? Who are we, right? What exactly are these people that are interacting with the child? And I love this picture with the aging hands of the grandparent and the nice, soft, cuddly little hands of a child. Technically, we call our generation or the grandparents' generation, Generation X. They are also called baby boomers if we are a little bit older. So it depends on what age all of us are today in this room. But Generation X and baby boomers are on the one side, right? So these are the people who typically make up a grandparents group for the little ones who attend our school and who Mrs. Lele looks after day to day and teaches and trains. And these little kids who are our grandchildren are called Generation Alpha, right? So these are little ones who are born of recent years. Now I want to tell you that this picture is quite misleading because for two reasons. The gap I'm trying to highlight between the elderly and the child is not always as much as this picture indicates. And I'm sure you all will all agree. The reason for this is that Generation X was often married early and they often had their children early and therefore naturally their grandchildren early. So many from the grandparents' generation are indeed quite young and quite fit. Okay, they may be like age is just a number. So they may have crossed their 60s or whatever, but they are fit, they are busy, they have their own professional life. So that's one end. And then Generation Alpha also, you realize, are quite smart. They're not little helpless, vague, confused little children. They're very sharp. They are looking at what's happening around them, listening to everything that's happening in the house. I've done a very interesting TED talk on this, which you may find on the TED platform, talking about how inclusive practices can be imbibed in these little ones. And we'll come to that point today as well. So what I'm saying, friends, is that this gap is actually less than we think. The grandparents are not as old as we think. And the little ones are not as young as we think. They're quite smart and they're quite grown up in their own ways. So it's a small gap. And we're still going to talk about how to negotiate this age difference and how to make best use of it for the welfare of the child and for our own happiness. So let's look at the next slide. We have a very unique role in these little children's lives. You're going to find a lot of these pictures, fun cartoons, because like I said, I don't want to make the slides heavy, but there's a lot of meaning hidden in there, right? So what does this slide say? This slide is actually allowing the child to make the grandparent a tiebreaker. So one parent has said no, the other parent has said yes. And the child says, I'm going to text grandma and, break the tie. Like I said earlier, very often when we are chatting amongst ourselves or when we are speaking in the family gatherings, we say things like, oh, grandparenting is all pleasure. It's all fun without the discipline. So we brought up our children with a lot of discipline, but now we don't have to bother with the discipline. I personally think that's not a good idea. I personally believe, and also as a psychologist, I will reiterate that there are certain parental rules which are set down in the home for the welfare of the child. Often these parental rules are set down keeping in mind school rules, keeping in mind the society around, and we look at a lot of the issues that are coming up societally in the little child's life. So generally, it's not a good idea to cross the parental rule book. It is, however, a good idea to discuss with parents, which basically means with your son or with your daughter. It's a good idea to discuss issues before we go face to face with the child, so that the child also does not learn to misuse this gap between the grandparents and the parents. Because children are also smart. They realize that granny saying one thing, mommy saying a different thing. So now they, learn to kind of manipulate, which is not a good idea at all. But at the same time, we want to keep our communication with the child open. So let's say this happens, and oh, this has happened in all of our lives, I'm sure, right? Even if your children are staying away, the child will pick up the phone and he'll be crying and he'll say, Granny, Granddad, please tell my mom, look at her, she's not letting me do this. So there's all these complaints. And the smart thing to do is to say, wait, let's figure out what has happened. Let's talk to your mom, let's talk to your dad. Don't worry, we'll sort it out. Right? It's not a good idea to say, oh, I'm sure you're right, baby. You just go ahead and do what you want, because the parents are then going to be at a loss and they may not know what to do next. But we do want the child to go on sharing. Let's go to the next slide. And this is a delightful picture. Oh, I must share with you, I had a lot of fun looking for these pictures for your talk. So in this slide, the child is put into a corner. He's punished. Okay. And now see how smart children are. He's saying, aren't I allowed to make at least one phone call to grandma? We all watch our legal serials and our police serials, and we all know that everybody, even a criminal, is allowed their one free phone call. And here's this little baby sitting there and saying, am I not allowed to make at least one phone call? Now, the idea here is again the same thing, that we have a unique role which we should not misuse. We should not turn into judge and jury and say you are right and you are wrong. But remember that when this situation arises, right, who is the person who is the most stressed? One would think it's the child because he's complaining. But just look at him, little rascal, he's sitting there with his cap on. The one who's distressed is actually the parent, because the parent is pulled between job, work, housework, budgeting, all the stresses of day-to-day life. And they have this naughty little boy, playing up and breaking all the rules. And they really don't know what to do. They're tearing their hair out. They're at their wits' end. So remember, friends, this is a good time to empathize, not just with the little one, but also with your own child, your son or your daughter or your son-in-law or your daughter-in-law. Empathize with them as you maintain boundaries, as we already have said, yet try to create a safe space where we can speak to both and be a safe space and a place where they can open their heart. It can be a soft area where you fully understand what is happening. I'm deliberately making this point, friends, because many of the times we find that as we become grandparents, we sort of leave behind our parental role. There was a time when we completely understood what is happening to our child. We saw what was breaking their heart and we spoke to them and we discussed everything with them. But what happens is, in Marathi, some of you may prefer Hindi or Marathi, so I'm just telling you some stuff from other languages. In Marathi, we say, नातवंड म्हणजे दुधावरची साय. वो मलाई होती है जो दूध के ऊपर आती है. So if you love your baby, your own kid, it's your दूध. But if you love your grandchild, it is the malai, right? So sometimes we forget the दूध for the malai. वो नहीं होने देना. Be there for your child and for your grandchild. And that, I think, is a very, very important role that all of us have to play. And believe me, it takes a lot of effort. The reason is that one also has to remain rational. One also has to keep in mind the current times, what is happening around, right? And not go back each time and say, hamare zamane mein aise hota tha. No, you have to look at what's happening in the world around today and why the child is behaving the way the child is behaving and why the parent is getting so stressed out. Let's go to the next slide. So basically, we think at at one end, we have the parents, grandparents, and the children are living in different worlds. Okay, so Anjum, we can have the next slide now. But the fascination here is that the child is also struggling to try to understand your world, right? Now, this is a lovely slide because, very often children don't really have a clear idea about our age. We think they do, but very often they don't. And so in this, you have this little one, who's saying, I'm not sure, my mom's 31, so I don't know how old my grandpa must be. And the poor grandpa is looking very distressed because he's made to become so old. I have a lovely story of a dear friend of mine. She's a lot older than me, but I have a lot of much older friends. She crossed 80. She celebrated her 80th birthday. And her little grandson came into the room and he said, Happy birthday, Grandma. And she said, Thank you, dear. I'm so happy you've come. And he said, Grandma, you're 80 years old? So she said, yes, today I'm 80. See, there's 80 written on my cake, birthday cake. And he said, Grandma, did you start at 1? So my friend laughed, she said, yes, baby, I started at 1. And then I went to 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 10, and then 20, and now I've come to 80. So for children, very often, this is something they cannot comprehend. For them, I mean, if they're 4 years old, 5 years old, 1 each year is a big, big achievement and a big hurdle that they have crossed every year. And for them, it's a matter of pride. And 80 years, wow, they just can't get it. Okay. So we actually belong in different worlds, and yet we have to work hard to make that world one. To make that world so that the grandchild feels comfortable telling you stuff, sharing their personal stories. Friends, I've noticed quite often that parents are very busy in their own lives, their work lives, their social lives. And therefore, the child often comes and confides a lot of lovely little stories, lovely little incidents to you because you have the time, because they know that you will be open to sharing and to listening and not judging them, right? Because of this, you actually have to keep that pathway open between you and the child. Again, another story which I'll share with you. Another friend of mine is a sports coach, and he interacts with, young children, and he talks to them and he trains them up for sports. And every time these children he was coaching would turn around and they would say, sir, how were things in your time, sir? Sir, how were aapke zamane mein kaisa tha? Aap kaise karte the? So they go on asking with great curiosity. And my friend told me, one day I told them very strictly, what do you mean, aapke zamane mein kaisa? Ye hamara zamana hai. This is my time. Why do you keep saying in your time, in your time? So sometimes you have to use humor. Sometimes you have to pull their leg a little, make them realize that, well, that was not a very appropriate question. Friends, remember that the key values that you want to share with these little ones, you also taught the same values to your own child. The value of kindness, the value of honesty, the value of concern for others, value of hard work. All of these are universal. Times may change, years may have rolled by, but these values, the value of being kind to people who are in need of your kindness, the value of empathy, I have learned through experience, and this is something I did not know before I became a grandparent, although I now recall that I used to love listening to stories from my grandparents about things that had happened to them, how they overcame difficult times, how sometimes fun things happen to them, things, unexpected things, which they somehow managed to deal with. Now I learn that children love these stories. They'll come back to you and they'll say, oh, grandpa, tell me about that time when, you were swimming in the sea and this happened to you. It doesn't have to be a scary experience. It doesn't have to be something very big that you're teaching them. It may be a tiny thing. Or grandma, tell me about the time when you helped some neighbor. You told me that story. Or tell me about the time when there was a robbery and some robber entered your house. So, they want to hear these stories again and again because they're fascinated. These are the times when although we are in different worlds, we can connect. And sometimes your children will be, wondering that what do you all talk for so long? What are you laughing about for so long? So they're quite, surprised that you connect so much with their children. Let's have the next slide, Anju. So these common interests that you may have, you need to work on. Sometimes one actually has to pick up new interests to align yourself with the little one. And that's also very interesting because you learn new things. I love this cartoon again, this picture. The grandma, just see how relaxed the grandma also is, right? She's sitting there on a hilly sort of grassy knoll, and she's sitting with the little one. He's, of course, with his head in his iPad, which incidentally is not a great idea. And we can talk about screen time. But I'll tell you one thing, although we'll come to the questions later. I'm seeing a lot of comments and questions in the chat box, and we'll come to all of them later. But I have found that, yes, children are fascinated with screens. They want to watch their cartoons. They want to see their iPad. They want to go to all these different devices. But if you are interesting enough, if you make your together time colorful and interesting and magical, they will put aside their screen and they will say, no, you tell me what you were going to tell me. So here you have this lovely interaction, which I love, where Granny is asking him, do you know what clouds are made up of? And he says, sure, they're made up of music files, right? Two different worlds, like I said, a huge gap between Generation X and Generation Alpha. But if we have common interests, if we have leisure time activities, जब भी उसके पास समय है, आपके पास समय है, और both of you sit and play chess, or both of you sit and play carom, or you solve puzzles, you solve jigsaws, you word puzzles, math puzzles, or you teach the child some new game. These are some of the things that you can do, but remember, we have to do time management for this. Remember, I'm keeping in mind that Generation X is also busy. They have their own work, they have their own recreation, they have their own social lives. So it's also, I'm making another important point here. It's also correct and it's fine to say, this is the time I'm free, this is the time I'm not free. The child has to know that there is time when you need your own time, when you have to do your own thing. You may have your medicines to take, or you may have your friends to meet. But the child learns to respect this. The same can happen when the parents are super busy and they may just come out of desperation. They may say, Mom, Dad, please just look after him or look after her. I just have to go for this meeting. And if you're not free, you need to say, this is the time when I'm busy. But fine, one of us will make some time. But next time, please let me know beforehand. So, all these boundaries with your own child, with your grandchild, all have to be drawn very, very clearly without hurting anybody in the picture. So one has to state one's priorities. At the same time, one has to be available because you don't want the little one to suffer in any way. Okay, so let's move ahead now. Let's go to the next slide. Now we come to this whole technology world, which is actually the natural world to this Generation Alpha, right? Remember, these were children who were born into the digital world. So they know so many things very, very naturally, whereas we are digital migrants. हम नए हैं इस दुनिया में. We have learned to negotiate. We have learned to handle screens. Today, so many of you are there on this virtual platform, which is great. But we are not born to this, right? So here you have a cute joke where the grandma is, standing with the little one and she's saying, that's your grandpa's version of keeping up with technology, reading the papers online. And he's hanging the paper on a clothesline and reading it. Honestly, we don't need to be so clueless. Okay, and I have learned that although we joke about this tech gap, technology gap, number one, we are really not so clueless, right? Most grandparents do know how to negotiate technology. At the same time, let me caution you that cyber crimes against the elderly are hugely on the rise. So very often a youngster will know how to negotiate this. I have a delightful story with my little grandson where we were talking about this, and I said, sometimes you get these messages saying you can access this or you have this special offer and so on. And he's under 10 and he says, Grandma, if this ever happens, just tell them, wait, I'm going to ask my grandson whether this is safe or not. So I found it so sweet that he is positioning himself as my savior, right? I think that's great. I think that a child who realizes that your grandparents could be at risk, either in the cyber world or in the real world, are really very, very empathic grandchildren. And that also makes them aware of the kind of risks and dangers that there are lurking in the cyber world. The virtual world is great. All of us need our emails and all the social media that you use. At the same time, it is very, very important to stay safe, to look after one's own safety, and also the safety of the little child. So I think it's important to learn and teach, to have these interactions with the little one where you are also learning from them. They love teaching, believe me. They love teaching how to negotiate this kind of magical world, which is so natural to them. But we must learn from the young. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a fun picture. It's like when we do not master our own technology. So it's just a takeoff on how we, when we were old, when we were young, we used to take camera pictures which went off, right? So sometimes you photographed your own shoe or you photographed some part of somebody's face. So this is, a picture which a little child might laugh at, saying, Grandma's iPad album, because grandma doesn't know how to take pictures on the iPad. Friends, this program, this talk is going to be there for you on the AACCI website. Sharmila ma'am will share that with you later. So, I feel at points, even share it with your little ones. Sit with them, talk to them about it, let it be seen by the parents as well. Because the more of us are on the same page, the more there is communication between all of us. And that is really what is paramount. So I again reiterate, an opportunity to learn is an opportunity to teach. So if you ask your little grandson or granddaughters, if you say, teach me how to take pictures on the iPad. See, my pictures came so bad. And the little one is teaching you. At the same time, you can teach them a lot of values. You can teach them about the beauty of nature. You can teach them how to compose a good photograph. You can teach them about the art of photography and aesthetics and so many other things, which the child will listen to with wide-eyed interest, right? And the parents often do not have the time or the bandwidth to do this with them. So I think it's great that the little ones have you. And like I said in the beginning, you're all there so enthusiastically, more than 200 of you attending. I think this is fantastic. Let's go to the next slide. So here I've just put in two fun pictures, because the phone, for example, a simple instrument which all of us use so much, has changed over the years, right? So here you have this little boy telling his grandma, thanks for letting me use your telephone, grandma, but where is the send button? So many children do not even know what a landline phone is like. They don't know what the instrument looks like. That's what's interesting to me. Many of them don't understand the importance of postage and why, so if a grandfather or a grandmother was collecting stamps, they won't understand what's a stamp because they haven't seen enough letters to see stamps. So you can sit with your stamp album collection, stamp collection, if you have one, if you were a philatelist when you were younger. And it's a wonderful opportunity to teach geography, to teach history. What was the name of countries before? How did a large country break up and now so many smaller countries are a part of it? What is a capital? Whoever's picture is on, or whichever picture is on the stamp will itself tell a story. So hours can be spent going through a music collection, through an LP collection, through a stamp collection, so many things, old photographs, old albums. They can be a wonderful pastime for a rainy afternoon when everyone else is sleeping and you and your little one are wide awake and having fun together. So I think here, this little child is so polite. This is the time at our age we can teach them social graces, politeness. I've seen a lot of little children who sometimes don't heed others. They don't heed the comfort of others. They're doing their own thing. Let's go to the next one, Anju. I think you've gone one back. Just go ahead. The next slide. Just go to the next slide, the one we've already shown, and the next one. Move on. Here too, this is also so sweet. They've probably only seen cordless phones, or most of the time they've seen only mobile phones. So here this little one is saying, Grandma, somebody wants to talk to you, but I can't get your phone off the cord. Now, here I wanted to underline one very important point, the point of imaginal play. Right? You can even have, depending on the age of your grandchild, all of you will have very little grandchildren because they are still attending, this class in school. But you can have this lovely imaginary phone conversation without even a real phone. Okay, talking about things which the child wants to talk about, right? From how was your school today, to who are the naughtiest children in your class? Is there somebody who troubles you in your class? Is there somebody who don't like in your class? Or who's your favorite in the class? Who's your best friend? And so on. So imaginal play increases the by leaps and bounds. And children love it. You see, imaginal play comes naturally to children. It's part of their inner life. It's how they express themselves. I will share with you a very, very fun anecdote between a grandmother and her little grandson. What happened was that day, the grandmother and the little grandson were together alone in the house, and the parents had gone away for some very important work and they were held up. So they kept phoning, they were worried. They kept phoning home and saying, is he okay? Is he bored? Is he hungry? Please give him something to eat. But sorry, we're getting so late. And the grandma said, no, don't worry at all. We are fine. So she struck up this interesting conversation with the little one because he was getting a little antsy without his mom and dad for so many hours. And she said, you know what, let's just pretend, because the little boy's father was a businessman. So she said, daddy must be interviewing a lot of people for jobs in office. And let's just play pretend that I am an interviewee and you're an interviewer. So you're the boss of the company. So this little one, he's like 4 or 5 years old. And he says, yeah, okay, I'll be the boss and you be the person who's looking for a job. Right? So the lady, the elderly grandmother, she came into the room and she said, sir, can I please get a job? I would really like, to work with your company. It's such a great company. And this little fellow is sitting over there and he said, okay, I'll think about it. Tell me, do you know how to use the computer? So the grandmother said, no, sir, I haven't. I know a little bit. I mean, I know how to type emails and all that, but I haven't really learned it very well. I said, no, learning the computer is very important. You must know Excel, you must know Word, you must know all these programs. So why don't you enroll in a class and you learn the computer for 1 month? And then you come back. So the grandmother played along and she said, okay, sir, I'll do that. But then will I definitely get a job in your firm? And he said, yes, we need good people. You come, I'll definitely give you a job. It'll be very nice for both of us. And then came the absolute kicker, in the whole conversation, which I was listening to. And the grandmother said, oh, sir, you must be having a lot of time. You're the boss, right? You're the highest person in the company. So you must be just delegating work to everybody. And you must be aaram se aap baithte hoge, apna kaam karte. And he said, no. You know what? The person who is the senior most in the company is the person who has to work 24/7. He cannot ever take a break. At 5 years, this little child had this insight that in order to be successful, you have to work hard. You cannot rest on your laurels and say, okay, now I own the company, let everyone else work. Fascinating. Where do they get this wisdom from? So I hold that Generation Alpha is really very wise. They have picked up a lot of things. बहुत सारी बातें सुनते हैं, समझते हैं, देखते हैं. So they are very alert, very vigilant, right? So that's a story I wanted to share with you, the story of the interview, which actually tells you of the kind of insights these little ones can give us. Let's look at the next slide. Believe me, there is no topic that is taboo that cannot be discussed, because the children will bring it up. You know, you may not, you may feel your son or your daughter may not like you to talk about certain things with the little one, or you may not feel comfortable. Next slide, please, Anju. But sometimes the child will bring up certain issues. So here's a little cartoon, which, you know, the discussion that's going on about LGBT in today's world. And believe me, a lot of children know a lot of things happening in the school, around them, in society. Can we have the next slide, Anjum, please? So it's important to keep in mind that there is really no topic which the child doesn't know about. Right? So she's here telling him LGBT is not a new kind of bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. But children are looking at the newspapers. They're looking at television, right? They're watching the news. They watch the Pride Parade. They know what's happening around. So many of the OTT channels that their parents or grandparents may be watching have talked about same-sex relationships. Children, however young they are curious about sexuality. Right? So we have to be extremely careful. We don't want to open doors which have not yet been opened for the child. We don't want to share material which is too adult. These are the times where we must have a discussion with the parents. Know well what questions have the parents fielded. How have the parents spoken to the child? Have they opened these topics at all? And make them aware that a child has all these issues and questions in their mind, so that the parents are also aware that they need to be addressed. And then, of course, the whole world of inclusion. Finally, friends, we want to teach our child the value of inclusion. सब समान है, कोई ज़्यादा नहीं है, कोई कम नहीं है. Very early in life, they have to learn that they have to be very inclusive towards caste, class, socioeconomic status, different colors of skin, gender, different sexualities, right? With the way society is changing around us, it's very important to pass this message to the youngster that we must learn not to differentiate along these lines, which are very artificial. So let's have the next slide. I just wanted to share with you that I have written a series of little children's books. I have put them all on Kindle. So if any of you are Kindle readers, please feel free to go and check out these books. The hero in my stories is Vic, V-I-K, that's his name, right? So he could be a Vikram, he could be a Victor. The child could be from any country, any place on the globe. Next slide, please, Anju. These are the different topics that I have covered in these books. So the series on Kindle is simply called Big Stories. The first series, which you see in the upper line, all talked about addiction prevention, because that was the issue in my mind as a psychologist at that time. I was very concerned that youngsters are experimenting, maybe not your little ones because they're very small still. But out there, you will see, out there in restaurants, there are youngsters experimenting with alcohol, experimenting with cigarettes, with weed, with drugs, with so many things. More frightening than that, getting into the world of screen addictions, gambling and gaming addictions. The gaming world is rife with young people who just cannot give up gaming. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions about already your little one getting attached to a device because they want to play a game. So in that first series, Under the Blue Sky, Earthworms and Snakes, An Upside Down Ball, Box of Treasures, and A Broken Day, I have addressed these different issues of addiction prevention, trying to convey through a child's eyes why it's not a healthy option, why a person should not spoil their life by going down this road where they become dependent. on either a substance or with a non-substance addiction. The lower line, the lower series, Brains That Glow, Cats, Dogs and Bats, Special Friends, Signal School. The book was called Sharing Spaces and Different Minds. Here, I have tried to address Vic dealing with different children at each point. So as you see from the cover, and these are covers made by a very talented psychologist, a student, past student of mine, who's also an illustrator. She's working as a psychologist in the field now. So in Special Friends, Vic has a little girl who is his friend, and she's in the wheelchair. She has disability, and Vic recognizes that she may be physically disabled, but she has a lot of other strengths. She's very bright, and he loves her, and he always comes back from his games field and shares different things with her. In Cats, Dogs and Bats, we have addressed the issue of different sensory disabilities, not being able to hear, not being able to see. So Vic has friends who have certain disability, and again, he recognizes that they would have some other very special sense. In Sharing Spaces, the story is about Vic's friend who comes from a very poor socioeconomic state. So where Vic goes to a very beautiful school, like your little ones come to this beautiful school, the little boy who's his friend goes to a school which is under a bridge on the road, which is called Signal Shala. Okay, so at the traffic signal under the bridge, they have set up a school, and this is a real school, right? I have visited a school like this. I have donated books to a school like that. So it opens up children's minds to the possibility that there will be children living quite deprived lives, living a life where they don't have all these facilities and comforts that we are able to enjoy in our own home. And yet those children are brilliant. They are very eager to learn, and they are learning in spite of these very, very deprived and poor circumstances that they live in. In Different Minds, we are looking at a friend of his who has mental retardation or who has a learning disability. And in Brains That Glow, we are looking at a friend of Vic's who is extremely bright. And believe me, and I'm sure many of your own grandchildren fall into this category, a child who is extremely bright also has difficulty. They get bored easily, they learn everything so fast, and then they start doing mischief around the class. I'm sure Mrs. Sharmila Lele and all her teachers have quite a time looking after these children who are actually quite very, very intelligent and in a special intellectual category. Yeah, you have a question about the books being available in print. I have put them all on Kindle, and the first series is available in print. You can order them. I'm still working with creating hard copies, but you can check. There are hard copies also available of the same. You can pre-order them from Kindle, because Kindle does allow for English books to be printed in hard copies. I also have a lot of Marathi books on Kindle for those of you who are Marathi readers, but they're not specifically for children. They're more for parents and, for bringing up a healthy child. But Marathi books don't come in hard copies. So I think I've taken a lot of your time. We want to keep question time in the end. I've tried to cover a lot of issues which may be touching your lives. Let's just go to the last slide, which is just a fun slide. I just want to say here that actually in grandparenting, nothing is off limits. We can have a devil of a good time as long as we heed boundaries, as long as we keep this understanding between Generation X and Generation Alpha, that we both are free to explore our own creativity, to become young once again with them. Creativity is the name of the game. So this slide I've put in where the devil is very politely and obediently obeying his grandma and saying he's going to get her a shawl. I will simply say, go where angels fear to tread. Have a blast with your little one. Have a really good time. But keep in mind that we are their mentors, and we have to teach them the right things in life, allowing at the same time their parents to have a very big role, because there will be a time when we are no longer around, and the parents are going to be there for the child. And ultimately, a time will come when the child will be there for the parents. So on that note, let me stop my talk. Let's shut the slides and let us try to address many of the questions that have come up in the chat. I'm going to hand over back to Sharmila ma'am. There are a lot of questions, I'm sure, and I'll leave it to her to decide which questions to pick up first.
Yes, I can see there are in chat. You can select whichever, Dr. Sovani. You can decide. Anybody would like to raise their hands and then ask instead of typing, so that way everybody can. Yes, you can just talk. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, please ask whatever is on your mind. Just ask, and I'll also simultaneously try to pick up some questions. Most of them are comments. There. Thank you so much. Many of you have enjoyed the talk. You asked your question about Kindle, which I've answered. I'm sorry, in between the voice.
I have a question. Can I go ahead?
Yes,
please go ahead.
Yeah. So it's about your slide about your books in which you talk about addictions.
Yes.
What is the right age to introduce those books to the children?
I have written these books through the, and thank you, ma'am, for asking that question. I'll be able to share a little more about the books. I have written them through the eyes of the child. So the narrative is through Vic's eyes. It's not an elderly person's narrative giving advice. Okay. So it's Vic going around his own world, going around his normal day and picking up what is happening around him. And it's Vic's own thoughts. It's like a stream of consciousness of this little boy who's between 5 and 10 years. So you can read these books to children even at an age when they don't yet read. You can, of course, give them to the child to read. But most importantly, please encourage a dialogue after the child has read the book, because the child will have a lot of questions. I will share one very interesting anecdote with you, which I also shared in my TED talk. What I did was, when I wrote these books, when I wrote the draft, I had a group of 5 to 10-year-old children on whom I piloted them. Because as a psychologist, we always believe that one should have a test run, see whether the children enjoy these books, whether they understand these books, whether something is difficult for them to understand. So one of these boys who was in my pilot group was about 7 years old, and he had a little sister who was 3. And at the time when he was reading these stories, she couldn't properly read so much. Okay. But she was listening to him. She's a very sharp little girl. A little later, by the time the books came out, she was 4, and her mother called me up and she told me, ma'am, one very interesting thing happened. My little daughter, who had never read the books, but who had listened to her brother reading them out aloud, went playing to the next door neighbor's house, and she found the uncle lighting up a cigarette. And she went to him and she said, Uncle, don't smoke. It's not good for you. Your lungs will get spoiled and your teeth will get black, and it's not good at all. You should stop smoking. So this lady who told me, she had such a laugh. She said, I really don't think that uncle will pick up a cigarette again without thinking of my little one. My point, ma'am, is that children can be the best ways, the best modes of social change. When you hear a little child telling you something which has a lot of wisdom, you pay attention. So I don't think there's any minimum age. Also, the screen addictions are starting very, very early. I'm seeing children as young as 4 and 5 years old getting addicted to the screen. So I think the earlier, the better. I don't think there's any lower age for reading these books to the children or to let them read.
Thank you.
Yes,
are these books available on Amazon?
On Kindle, yes. Okay. And the hard copies can also be pre-ordered.
Okay, thank
you. Yes, there's another hand up.
Can I speak, please?
Yes, please. Do ask.
Thank you, Anuradha ji. The many things you have covered in such a short time. We are dealing with human being, and especially in the changing time, things are changing very fast. So sometimes grandparents have their own ideas, and they are convinced that what I am saying is correct from the value point of view, principle point of view, and the son has or daughter-in-law has a different view. In that situation, when it comes to principle, then and values, and the son and the father has a different view, the child will not really get, the grandchild will not really get a same view what the parent and the grandparent will provide. How do we handle?
You're right. I'll tell you my view on this. See, there is going to be differences because there is 2-3 generations in play here. It is your generation, your son and daughter-in-law's generation, and the little one who is the 3rd generation. Now, the point here is that finally, your interest is in keeping channels of communication alive. The child will have certain questions today. He'll have a different set of questions 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. The idea is to keep the pathway open so that the child can come and discuss things with you. You can share stories which will highlight the values that you want to highlight. I think stories is a wonderful medium to convey to the child certain values. Generally, it's not a good idea to say that my son or my daughter-in-law or my daughter or my son-in-law, that is, your parents are wrong and I don't believe XYZ. It is better to say that, let me share with you a story and then you decide for yourself. Now, remember that sometimes these children are too small to decide for themselves. They are really very, very young, and you can leave certain things for later. So you can say, I'm going to tell you one story, then we'll talk about it. You also talk about it to your parents. And then as you get older, I will tell you more stories and I will share more things with you. So one important thing to believe is that this is not the be all and end all. Aaj ke aaj ye resolve nahi karna hai. The idea is to keep the conversation going, and the child will be thinking in their minds of a lot of things. And believe me, they do have, little children also do have a moral compass. And they do believe that there is a right and there is a wrong, and they will come to that conclusion in the end. And they will also look at your face, granny's face, mom's face, dad's face, and figure out who's upset. So even without saying, suppose he's done something that you don't like, even if you don't say it, he'll look at you and he'll say, Dadaji, you didn't like what I said. So that's enough, because one has conveyed that there is a difference of opinion. And he has to figure out for himself what is right and what is wrong. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Dr. Sovani? Yes, Ms.
Yeah, I can
Tanya.
see one. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, taking that same point forward, sometimes I feel I'm actually more strict with my grandchild than the parents themselves. I mean, I sometimes feel they are more lenient towards them for certain, for certain.
You're right. You're right. Very often parents, I have seen, let things go because they're just too stressed to handle things. So I agree with you. Sometimes a grandparent can be stricter. Try this interesting exercise. If your little one is lucky enough to have all 4 grandparents, father's parents and mother's parents, one day when you're sitting and having a chat with them, with the little one, just ask, who's the strictest from all these people? So I have often done that with my grandchild, and many of my friends do it. Don't judge. Don't say it's good to be strict or bad to be strict. Just say, let's figure out mom, dad, dada, dadi, nana, nani. Sabse strict kaun hai? Believe me, the child will have a very clear hierarchy. They will tell you, sabse strict ye hai, sabse kam strict ye hai. So they have fully understood where they can get more mileage, where they can get more leeway, and who they have to be more careful with, which is great, right? That means they have understood that there is a rainbow of colors, from very strict to not at all strict. See, the point again, friends, is that finally they have to discover their own answers. As they grow older, we don't want them all the time asking somebody, ye karu ke wo karu. So it's good that we are giving them such a big range of options and let the child understand that you can have something that is so strict and you can have an option that is so lenient. And then in between, I have all these other options, but I need to discuss. So I need to come back and say, हाँ मैंने ये चुना, मैं ये करने वाला हूँ, ये ठीक है. Then the parent can answer, mom can answer, dad can answer, you can answer. And that opens dialogues once again. It also gives us the opportunity to say why a certain option is not good, which is more important, right? So you say, nahi, ye nahi karna chahiye because it will hurt so and so. So then you're teaching them the value that do nothing that is going to be harmful to others. Just because it's advantageous to you, don't harm others. That's a good value to teach, right? So I think that would be the right answer. I can see 2 more hands up and we are almost out of time. So let's quickly address these last 2 questions. Yes? Yeah.
Mrs. Raija, I think, yes.
Unmute me. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for a nice, educative and enlightening talk.
Thank you.
I had an incident about 2 years ago when my granddaughter Ishana was about 4. She was sitting in my lap and I was reading a Times of India newspaper where she saw the obituary column and suddenly asked me, is your picture not here? Why is it not there? It was a very difficult situation to look into that. And then I tried to explain to her, this is a picture of people who have gone to God, etc. Then suddenly she looks around and says, asking for my father, whether was his picture there when he passed away. It's, it's an emotional situation. How do you handle situation of this kind?
I think it's a wonderful situation. I think it's great and you described it so nicely. First of all, it showed that you have so much together time with the little one. You're sitting together, you're reading the newspaper. They are curiously watching. So a new good habit is being imbibed to read a newspaper, to understand the news, right? Now, the question that the child is asking is a very natural question. So the first thing we have to learn as grandparents is to not feel emotional or shocked or hurt with the question. It's the most natural question. They see something and they understand slowly the concept of death. We have done very interesting studies on how the concept of death unfurls in the child's mind. When the child is very small, they don't understand death. As they get older, they understand that it means that the person is never going to be around anymore. Okay. Till then, they feel maybe they go somewhere else and maybe they'll even come back. So that whole concept and its emergence is, I think you're very lucky as a grandfather that you've been a witness to how the child slowly adopted this concept. And I think one must answer these questions in the most natural way, saying, yes, beta, when we also get very old, no, one day, yes, our picture will be over here. Let's hope it's many, many years from now. But yes, my father's picture was here when he passed away. And then we can share nice stories about them. We can say, even today, he must be in heaven or wherever, whatever your belief is. And he must be so happy that you're such a good child and you're studying so well. So, they understand this whole idea that elderly people will bless you and they will look after you. And, you also feel very safe and protected, that there are all these good thoughts which are going around in the world. But it is not at all wrong to give them the truth. Okay, to say that, yes, when people pass away, as you very rightly answered, their picture comes over here. And it's a way for everybody to remember them lovingly. So always highlight the positive part.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, another question from the gents.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Milan Mehta.
Yes.
I have a question. Is there a slight difference in the role of the Dada Dadi and the Nana Nani? Imbibing values, imbibing ways of life. Don't the Nana Nani take a slightly back step?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And it's actually arising out of the Indian patriarchy, where, the father's family is where the child will be with. The reality is that the child is in the driver's seat. Believe me, the child decides who they are going to be close with, who they want to share with. So they have 4 grandparents to choose from. And we do not want to jockey ourselves. It's not a competition, but the child does make a choice. In fact, I've often had, because as a psychotherapist, I talk to little children as well. And they often tell me, ye baat main dada ji ko nahi bol sakta, लेकिन मैं नाना जी से बोल सकता हूँ, या ये बात मैं सिर्फ दादी को बताऊंगा. So the child always makes a judgment who they can tell certain things to. Therefore, although you may not be living, the Nana Nani may not be living with the child may be in the Dada Dadi's house or in the parents' house, but there is definitely an influence. And to answer your question, in today's world, so now we come to the positive aspects of a virtual world. In today's world, however far your child is, they could be on a different continent, but you can still have video calls with them. You can still have chat sessions with them. So every grandparent can have a huge role in the child's life, regardless of the physical distance, right? So I think one has to look not at residence or distance, physical distance away from the child, but how much of mind space in the child's mind is occupied by that grandparent. I think that is the most crucial thing. And if you can make yourself a significant other, as we say in science, significant other, agar aap ban jate ho for the child, nothing like it. The child will always turn to you for direction, for wisdom, for understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is one point written in the chat, like psychology is such an important subject by, I think, Mr. Sala, to handle relationships and life, etc., and that it should be introduced as a subject in school at some point. So I completely agree. There is a choice when the children grow up to be a little older. In senior school, they can make this choice. But at our level, when children are so young, we have value education and we have storytelling, where we do talk about relationships and, good values and how to kind of, take care of each other. So that is definitely a part of school curriculum as a school. Yeah, just wanted to clarify that. Mr. Lala, any further questions? Anything?
Yeah, I think we've covered most things, although I still see one hand up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. Dr. Sovani, you were saying something?
No, I see one hand up, but I think we've resolved most of the areas that people had questions about. Yeah.
Mrs. Barodawala, Anjum, anything you were saying?
No, Mr. Jain had a question. Should we take that one last question?
I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. Who had a question? I think.
Rajvi Jain's
Yeah. I think we understood. We answered their question. The one written iPad, I think she's raising the hand. The one with iPad, yeah.
Now I have my granddaughter. When I speak to her about my husband, she has associated old people dying. So whenever she sees an old person, she's always afraid. She calls me Ella. So she says, Ella, now you're going to die because you're growing old. Or my nana or my nani is going to die, but I don't want you all to die. So my son has stopped us talking about death or anything associated with a sick person or a dying person. And so the whole chapter has been closed. Now, what do you do in such a...
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I understand the parents' concern. They don't want their child to be frightened. So perhaps they've just put this, off limits. But believe me, a child has his own curiosities. A boy or a little girl will be talking about this to all their friends in school. So I remember once we were walking down the road and all the children had come out of school and they were walking past us. And I heard this very interesting debate, believe me, happening between two primary school kids. So one boy is saying, जब we मरते हैं ना, तभी वो body को ना जला देते हैं. And the other fellow said, नहीं, जलाते नहीं है, वो दफना देते हैं, वो bury करते हैं. So, they were having this whole discussion. So much as parents might shut off certain discussions, the children are going to have them. I think to reiterate what I said earlier, the smart thing to do is to keep the discussion positive. So not look at death as something that is frightening, but just say that, see, everything, even you, suppose you're working in the garden with the little one, and you all are working on, planting trees and watering plants, and you say, dekho, abhi ye plant hai na, wo mar gaya, it's not alive anymore. So they understand that it's not something very frightening, that just as life can end, life can come also. So I think that whole discussion somewhere can go along the path where the child is no longer fearful. Because you see, they're going to see death of pets. They're going to see, if not in your home, maybe in the neighbor's home. They're going to hear of accidents. Like the gentleman was saying, if you're reading the newspaper together, there's every paper every day has millions of deaths covered. So they're going to have questions. Maybe what your son means is that discussion about deaths about the family members should not be there. But there's no harm talking about, like, if from a news item, something like that comes up, it can certainly be discussed. But I think you should discuss it with your son and daughter first, and not directly with the child.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Jain, do you have to say something?
Yeah, I think they were trying to ask a question.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. You're on mute. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah,
Yes,
let's
yes.
make that the last question, because we
Yeah,
have.
yeah, ma'am.
Yes,
I have,
yes.
thank you very much for your lovely talk. I have one question, I feel today's parents indulge their children much, much more than what we used to. They want to give them everything. Like we feel it is a little bit much more. And because of that, they lose the value of certain things. How do we resolve this dilemma? What is the right balance?
Yeah, no, I think
Thank
that's
you
a
so
very interesting question, and I'll try and answer it briefly, although it's a whole long discussion. See, remember one thing, that there are definitely boundaries that need to be drawn. So first of all, one can have a discussion with your son or daughter, talking about, for example, if the child loses a pencil or a pencil box or a water bottle in school, then what should be done? So typically, remember, parents are very stressed. They don't want that hassle of sitting and talking to the child. So they'll say, chalo abhi naya le lo. But if you can set up something like, okay, if you've lost it, then you have to use the old water bottle or the old compass box for some time, something like that. But more than that, ma'am and sir, please remember that when we were at your age, when you were parents, we perhaps were not so socially and socio-economically as well off. Your hard work has raised the living lifestyle of your children to a different level. Now, their hard work has raised that even further. So today they are positioned in a different place. The discipline and the values need not change. Affordability may change. So it is finally up to the parents to make that balance between what we can afford to give our children and what we should give our children. We can make a contribution in terms of discussing with them, saying, maybe it's a good idea to try this. Finally, the parents do have to look after the child. We are not going to be there for the child forever. One other answer can also be that when the children come to your home or to your room, suppose you are living in the same house, you can say, in this place, these rules apply. That can be done. That when we are in my house, we will not do XYZ things, even if they are allowed in your house, which is fine, because you're setting boundaries and you're still not saying that your son or your daughter are wrong. Okay, so I think there are many ways around things. Once again, let me say that rather than coming to one answer, saying ye kare ki wo kare, it's more important to start that discussion. Why is it important to be careful with your belongings? Why is it important not to spend too much money on something when you can afford to buy something that is cheaper, if it's not going to be of poorer quality, and so on? So these discussions are more important.
Thank you.
That's so true. That's so true. Thank you so much, dear grandparents, for attending this today. And our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Sovani on behalf of all our grandparents, teachers, and myself for conducting this session for us. Very enlightening, very informative, and the interactive session at the end was really brought out certain points that we all face in today's modern world. If you still have any questions, feel free to write to us, and Dr. Sovani will be happy to answer later on. If there's anything you need us to help you with, we are always there, dear grandparents. So wish you all the best and a very healthy and happy life ahead. And we hope to see you soon for our Grandparents' Day, which is coming up in February. And we'll see you in person at school. And it's not just you and us, but it's going to be the children performing for you. So look forward to having you there then, and you have a wonderful time ahead.
Thank you, Mrs. Lele.
much.
Thank you to the school and also to AACCI for giving me this platform to share with so many grandparents and have such a nice discussion. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.